We bought 3 sealed 100 milliliter bottles of Dior Sauvage Eau de Parfum within 72 hours. One from Amazon for $118.99, one from Sephora for $145, and one from Macy's for $145. Then we tested them side by side under the kind of conditions counterfeit sellers hate. Identical blotters, identical skin prep, the same room temperature, batch code checks, atomizer comparison, box weight, cap fit, and an 8-hour wear test that did not forgive anything. By the 20-minute mark, one of them was already behaving strangely. By hour 4, the problem was no longer subtle. File this away now because it is the entire lesson of this video. Fake fragrance almost always tells on itself twice. First in the opening, then again in the dry down. This matters more than most fragrance comparisons because this is not about whether one store gives better samples or nicer wrapping. This is about whether the bottle in your hand is the bottle you think you paid for. And the industry is still far too comfortable acting as though authenticity is an emotional concern rather than a financial one. You already know the feeling I mean. You buy a fragrance you know well, you spray it, and a small voice in your head says something is off. But because the bottle looks expensive and the listing looked polished, you start arguing with your own nose. That is the scam. Not just the fake juice, but the little psychological trick that teaches grown women to distrust their own perception before they distrust a retailer. Remember this, too. Authenticity is often boring in exactly the right way. Start with the Amazon bottle, because that is where most women are tempted first. The listing positioned it exactly the way these things are always positioned. Not as suspiciously cheap, because that would alarm you, but as just discounted enough to feel like you had outsmarted the system. The price was $118.99 for 100 milliliters, prime delivery, clean product photos, respectable seller ratings, and all the language designed to calm a buyer who already knows that luxury fragrance on Amazon is never a simple story. On first spray, it did a good imitation of Sauvage for about 90 seconds. You got the metallic citrus flash, that sharp bergamot pepper brightness, and the cool synthetic lift that makes the original feel almost electrically clean at the top. That is what it did well. It copied the first impression. Then it started unraveling. The alcohol bloom lasted too long, nearly 3 full minutes before settling, which is already a small warning if you know the real fragrance well. The pepper felt louder but flatter, as if somebody had turned up one note because they could not recreate the structure underneath it. The heart never opened properly. Instead of that familiar movement into lavender, ambroxan, and a smooth mineral woodiness, it sat there like a sketch of the fragrance rather than the fragrance itself, thinner in the middle and oddly syrupy at the edges. By hour 3 on skin, it had collapsed into a generic woody musk with a faintly sour sweetness that Dior simply does not do here. The counter will never tell you this, because the counter is not the problem. Marketplace inventory is, and the bottle gave us our first physical clue as well. The atomizer sprayed a narrower, wetter stream, and the cap seated just a fraction too loosely, the sort of tiny mechanical sloppiness counterfeiters keep hoping nobody over 40 will notice. The Sephora bottle is the version many women buy when they want to remove uncertainty from the equation. You pay the prestige price, you buy from an authorized chain, and you expect the transaction to be boring in the best possible sense. This bottle was $145 for 100 milliliters, purchased directly through Sephora, sealed, properly packed, and from the beginning, it smelled like what it was supposed to smell like. The bergamot was colder and cleaner than the Amazon one, less sugary, more mineral, with black pepper that felt integrated rather than pasted on top. The lavender came through early, not as powder or soap, but as a cool aromatic seam running through the brightness. And underneath, it was that familiar ambroxan architecture, dry, airy, masculine in a very polished way, like a crisp white shirt under a dark wool coat. What it did especially well was proportion. Nothing stuck out trying to convince you. Its catch was not authenticity. It was storage and turnover. And this is where women with developed taste should stop being polite. Sephora stores are excellent for accessibility, but they are also environments full of light, heat, constant handling, and floor traffic. And if your bottle comes from display-adjacent inventory rather than from well-protected backstock, you can sometimes get a bottle that smells a touch more open or more aerated than you would prefer, especially with a formula built on volatile freshness. Ours was clearly authentic, but it felt slightly more eager in the top than the best version of this fragrance should feel. Not wrong, just a little more exposed. Hold on to that, because exposure turned out to matter more than price. Here is the pattern beginning to show itself. The fake one tried hardest in the first 5 minutes. The authentic ones did not need to. Then there was the Macy's bottle, which many women still underestimate because department store fragrance has been treated for years as something dowdy, slow, or somehow less informed than newer beauty retail. That is lazy thinking. The price was also $145 for 100 milliliters, so there was no bargain to seduce you, no artificial sense of winning before the package even arrived. It was simply the same fragrance from an authorized source, sold in the old-fashioned way. Full retail, sealed stock, less theater. On first spray, it was immediately calmer than the Amazon bottle and slightly more composed than the Sephora one. The bergamot was present, but tighter. The pepper read finer, less metallic. The aromatic core emerged with real coherence, and the ambroxan, that warm, dry radiance that gives Sauvage its spine, unfolded as a texture rather than a blast. It smelled like pressed steel and clean skin and cedar seen through cool daylight. What it did best was continuity. There was no point in the wear where it had to prove itself. The flaw, because there is always one, is not in the liquid, but in the experience of buying it. Department store counters still vary wildly by location. Some are beautifully run, and some are operating on autopilot. And if you are shopping online through a big department store, you need to pay attention to fulfillment language and packaging condition, because luxury retail does not automatically mean careful fulfillment. But in our test, the Macy's bottle had the cleanest batch code printing, the smoothest cap fit, the most even atomizer dispersion, and the most disciplined dry down. That mattered. It mattered a lot, because by hour 6, it was still unmistakably Dior Sauvage Eau de Parfum, and not merely something in that family. If you want the exact listings we used, along with the authentication checklist I keep for buying fragrance online without wasting money or insulting my own nose, it is all in the description. I put it there because this is the sort of thing women usually learn only after they have paid full price for a fake and then been told they are imagining it. That lesson gets expensive very quickly. Before I tell you which bottle won, here is how I scored them, because I did not use the usual amateur standards. I used batch code integrity, meaning whether the code format, print quality, and manufacturing logic actually matched known Dior production patterns rather than merely existing on the box. I used mechanical tolerance, which sounds technical, but simply means how precisely the cap, collar, and atomizer were assembled, because counterfeiters are often better at copying appearance than fit. I used volatility behavior, meaning how the top notes evaporated in the first 20 minutes, and whether the transition into the heart happened with structure or with a cliff edge. And I used base persistence fidelity, which is far more important than longevity alone, because a fake can linger but still smell wrong, while a real bottle should remain recognizably itself deep into the wear. Those are not glamorous criteria. That is precisely why they work. The winner was the Macy's bottle, Dior Sauvage Eau de Parfum, 100 milliliters for $145. And once you look at the evidence, there is nothing ambiguous about it. This is where those two earlier phrases pay off. Authenticity really was boring in exactly the right way, and the scent told on itself exactly where I told you it would, in the opening and in the dry down. The Macy's bottle had the cleanest batch code execution, the best mechanical precision, the most controlled early evaporation, and the most faithful base by a comfortable margin. It did not flare too brightly up top the way the Sephora bottle did, and it certainly did not collapse into a hollow imitation by hour 3 the way the Amazon bottle did. It just moved correctly from citrus and pepper into that cool, aromatic mineral body and then into the dry ambroxan wood structure that makes the real fragrance feel expensive rather than merely loud. That is what a proper bottle does. It behaves with confidence because it does not need to impersonate itself. What made that conclusion even more satisfying was how neatly outside opinions lined up with what we found before they had any reason to agree. One independent collector I trust, someone who has gone through more bottles of modern masculine designer fragrance than most boutiques sell in a season, smelled the 3 blind and said one of them had the exact kind of restrained top and measured dry down he expects from current Dior production. Another fragrance consultant who works with authentication issues for private clients noticed the same thing I did about the spray pattern and the base texture. She said one bottle felt like it was shouting the idea of Sauvage instead of actually being Sauvage, which is almost word for word what my notes said before I ever asked her. That sort of overlap matters. It means your nose is not being asked to believe a story. It is being allowed to confirm one. So here is the buy guide I would give a woman I liked enough to save her money. Buy the Macy's bottle at $145 for 100 milliliters if you want the highest probability of getting exactly what Dior intended, especially if this is a gift or a staple purchase and not an experiment. Buy the Sephora bottle at $145 for 100 milliliters if convenience matters, if you prefer a retailer with easier beauty returns, or if you are already placing another order and want the security of authorized stock, but choose sealed backstock inventory whenever you can and do not assume all handling conditions are equal. Do not buy the Amazon bottle we tested at $118.99 for 100 milliliters. And I am being very precise there. I am not saying never use Amazon for fragrance under any circumstances. I am saying do not buy from listings where the only thing protecting you is optimism and a review average. If you insist on using Amazon for fragrance, the seller structure matters more than the discount. A small price cut is not savings if the dry down is counterfeit. That is the larger rule, and it goes well beyond this one cologne. Mature taste is not about chasing the cheapest path to luxury and hoping your intelligence can outrun someone else's fraud. It is about recognizing that price, packaging, and reputation are all theater until the liquid proves itself. And once you understand that, you stop buying stories and start buying patterns. If this is the kind of testing you want more of, not fragrance as fantasy, but fragrance as evidence, then subscribe, because there are far too many women with excellent noses being trained to ignore them. And tell me in the comments which clue would have caught your attention first: the wetter Amazon spray, the overlong alcohol bloom, or the way the fake bottle gave up the entire game by hour 4 when the real ones were only just beginning to settle into themselves.